Growth burns cash. Scaling burns cash. You want to grow, it costs.
Welcome to The Legal Edge, where we dive into what actually drives law firm growth. I'm your host, Rob Rosasco, and today we're talking with someone who's done something that most law firm owners only dream of: scaling a practice from a single office to a multi-state operation that landed at number 3 on the Law Firm 500 fastest growing law firms in 2025. Our guest today is Charles Hatley, CEO of Melone Hatley, a family law firm with offices in Virginia, Texas, Florida, and South Carolina. Charles started his legal career in 2013 and spent years as a litigation attorney, managing offices for a national law firm before transitioning into leadership. In January 2025, he stepped into the CEO role of Melone Hatley, and under his leadership, the firm has earned back-to-back Inc. 5000 recognition and been named Best Places to Work. But here's what makes Charles' story so extremely valuable. He's made the leap from legal practitioner to business leader, from litigating cases to building systems, culture, and growth architecture. He's also the host of 2 successful podcasts: I Now Pronounce You Divorced, where he brings his expertise to complex family law topics, and The Business Blueprint, which explores entrepreneurship and organizational leadership. He's built a law firm that's growing fast without losing quality, great client support, and culture. Charles, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. You made me sound great in that intro, so thank you.
You're welcome. Before we begin talking about systems and strategy, the business of growing a law firm, let's talk a little bit about your transition from an attorney, a legal practitioner, to an entrepreneur or business owner. Charles, you weren't always the CEO. You were in the trenches as a litigation partner and managing offices for a national law firm. That's a very, very different job than running an entire business. So let's start with how that shift happened and what you had to sort of move away from or unlearn to make it work.
You know, the reality for me, when I went to law school, I actually, I know some people go to law school because they're like, I don't know what to do after college. I was one of those people. I had always wanted to be a lawyer. Since the age of 5, I carried a briefcase to kindergarten, got appropriately beat up for doing that, suffered the reprisals I should have suffered. And so when I got out, I loved litigating. I loved being in the courtroom. I loved going to trials. And I would take, if somebody came in with a trial the next day, I would take it, spend all night, go. And then I got to manage people. And it was one of those promotions that was the Peter principle, where if you grow so fast, eventually you're going to phase out and not be good. I would call it a Peter promotion, where they said, you're super good at being a litigation attorney. Let's try your hand at management. And I liked it. It worked. And I now, instead of being able to just litigate my handful of clients that I could naturally control, I got to be in contact with 10 different people's clients and really start shaping 10 different people's clients. And I was like, that's pretty cool. What if I could multiply that by 10 again?
That's actually a very forward-thinking mindset. So, and I mentioned this to you when we first started chatting before we started recording the podcast. You don't see that very often in attorneys. So it's an admirable trait, and I'm glad to see that it's working well for you. Again, talking a little bit about your background, you came from a large law firm that had national exposure, and now you're leading what you personally refer to as a boutique practice. What advantages did you think that big law background gave you in building systems at Melone Hatley? And then what did you perhaps take away from big law that you needed to sort of leave behind in this boutique environment?
My wife and I actually had this conversation the other day as we were getting ready and getting the kids ready. She said, imagine how much money we could have made had you done this 10 years ago. And I said, we would have made zero because I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
So, going to the big law, what it let me see was, I think that coming into law school, we all had that Matlock vision, right? The one guy with maybe a paralegal and assistant that goes out, finds the loophole, goes and litigates the loophole. But it was seeing that corporatization is not a bad word, right? Corporatization is systems and processes that become repeatable, that give people comfort, right? When you know the answer, it gives people comfort. And seeing how people reacted to that from the big law perspective taught me that, hey, number one, you can run a law firm like a business. You don't have to say, like, I'm a law firm, I'm different than a business. The reality is we're producing a product that people are consuming.
Yep.
At the very basic of it. And what I needed to leave behind was the weight of the corporate hierarchy. So, you look at years and years of promotions that kind of siloed, and now you had favorites getting promoted. Fortunately, I became a favorite while I was there. So I was both a beneficiary of this, but I watched people that I believed were better than me get passed over because they didn't give the right handshake at the Christmas party. And I was like, what if we could leave that all behind, get rid of the weight of the hierarchy, not completely flatten out the managerial curve, but make it more accessible for new attorneys to be able to walk into the owner or the whatever C-suite title you want to have's office and say, hey, I've got a question.
Very good. A lot of attorneys resist the business side of law. Again, something else we talked about. They just simply want to practice law. They don't want to run a business. They don't want to run a company, and that's fine. How did you reconcile that tension yourself? How do you help other attorneys at Melone Hatley navigate it as well?
It's tough, right? So I was 5 years old. I questioned why everything existed. I wanted to know why I had to stop at a stop sign. Who made that rule? Who had the audacity to tell me when to stop? So it was going, seeing the ins and the outs of the legal practice and saying, like I said, what if I could help 10 times as many people? Is the realization that I can't do that while I'm standing in a courtroom, right? So if I pick up a file, I have to review it. I have to prepare for trial. I have to talk to my client. I have to go to court. That's 8 hours gone. Where maybe I could have spent 8 hours on efficient and effective management of an organization and helped out 80 people in those same 8 hours instead of just one person. And then, the wheels got turning. All of a sudden, it was just math. It was math and how many times I could multiply this. And the very much so realization that in order to grow a business, you have to take risk, right? You have to take risks. You have to jump into the unknown. Sometimes you wake up in the morning, you put your feet on the floor, just hoping and praying the floor is going to be there. In law, you don't take risks. You do the safest thing possible. You go in with knowns. I couldn't function like that. So I had to quit practicing law because unfortunately, I know that there's amazingly smart people out there that can probably do it. I wasn't smart enough to hold those two thoughts in my brain at the same time. I had to get rid of practicing the risk adverse side of my brain and really hold on to that risk taking side of my brain.
Right. Yeah, and that makes sense. And again, as you've already stated, as an attorney, you have to be risk averse because you need to protect the interest of your client. Whereas as a CEO, you're obviously representing the interests of your business, which allows you that flexibility. Okay, so when you officially stepped into the CEO role of Melone Hatley in January of last year, 2025, what was the first major decision you made that sort of set the tone to how you'd lead the firm differently?
The first major decision, so my wife started the organization, I joined her, was, are we ready for a CEO? I know anybody who looks at Facebook and LinkedIn sees somebody call themselves CEO when they're out there selling protein powder. We've all seen it. Like, not a CEO, you don't run anything. We had really resisted the idea of that title. We had resisted the idea of that organizational structure until it was necessary. So the first big decision was taking a step back and saying, what does a CEO do? And then I read some books. I didn't try to make it up on my own. There's people that have already answered that question. And
Real.
And I said, I think we're ready for this. And my wife, who started the business, I had to tell her, look, you're the founder. You started the business, but I'm taking it over. She agreed, of course. It's not like this is going to happen. But it was that idea that now I had to force myself into a position that didn't exist. So I had to figure out how to not only engage the team members who had never reported to a CEO, but build their trust into this architecture that I was now trying to build.
Yeah.
And it came through transparency. So the first big decision, 100% transparency. I don't know everything, but I'm going to try to do my best.
Okay. Good for you. And that's, just as a human being, that's a challenging mindset to take on. I think we as intelligent people think we do know everything and our way is the best. And to subscribe to that philosophy of transparency and then actually put it into place and manage a firm that way, again, admirable. And just out of curiosity, you mentioned your wife was the founder. Is she still practicing law or is she managing?
She's not.
Okay.
She stepped away a little bit later than I did. She held on to the dream a little bit longer. We needed her to step into the CFO role.
Okay.
My problem is I do have a touch of a finance background. I believe that you can run a law firm into 8 figures easily on a checkbook register
Hmm.
if you pay enough attention.
Right.
That would annoy everybody else. So having her step into that CFO role really helped us start building out our financial department, which is necessary when you're running bills and trying to collect money, right?
Yep.
And it also helped keep away the minuscule points I would land on to help her filter those through to an organization.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, especially when you're talking about its scale. Someone in that role is an absolute necessity. Okay, so now let's dive into the actual building a law firm part of the conversation. A lot of family law firms plateau at 3 to 5 attorneys. And in my experience, calling on law firms for nearly 30 years, if you find a family law firm that has more than 5 attorneys, it's the aberration. And it's really simply because they can't figure out how to scale without the wheels coming off. Client support suffers, cases fall through the cracks, culture deteriorates. But you've grown Melone Hatley to a multi-state operation with how many attorneys at the firm now?
We have 33
Okay, which
right now. Yeah.
obviously well exceeds that 5 cap we typically look at. Not to mention the fact that, of course, you've earned Inc. 5000 status twice and you hit number 3 on the Law Firm 500 list. So let's discuss what separates firms that scale successfully from those that collapse under the weight of their own growth. When Melone Hatley was expanding, whether it was adding attorneys, opening new offices, or entering new markets, what was the first system that you had to nail down in that particular office in order to make sure that nothing broke?
We started our growth during COVID, which was a blessing. So everything that we did because of COVID meant that we had to be ready to go remote. And we started on a technological winter where everybody had to adopt on how to do things differently, but we were small. So the first system was having a good remote work policy in place because everybody who works in our other offices, they're remote from the central office. And we need to be able to trust that they're going to get on Teams, be in meetings. We need to be able to look at their calendars. So cloud-based softwares versus local saved calendars.
Yep.
And it was setting up regular meeting intervals, which I didn't think was weird because I had worked in other industries, but a lot of attorneys were not ready to have a weekly meeting. And, just having that weekly meeting allowed us a sort of quality control because, any practitioner, nobody will ever do it better than you. I hope that everybody does it better than me. So I'm a little bit weird in that, but it was letting go of some of that control and then setting up those weekly meetings and having that technology as a backbone to support those weekly meetings and to support being able to jump on and see somebody's calendar that they're supposed to be in court and just saying, hey, I trust you, but you're in court, right? And they'd be like, yeah. Do you have any questions about court? And then, you can roll it in to not micromanage, but it's go to micromanaging that when you're going to trust somebody to open an office under your name.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of a segue to our next topic. Family law, as I'm sure you well know, is deeply personal and quite often high stakes work. How do you maintain consistency in terms of the client experience across multiple offices and multiple jurisdictions? And what systems do you have in place to actually support that?
We did something very outside of the box. We called our clients, every single one of them, and said, how are things going? And we invested in that. And it came from me. I don't want to brag that I got to go to a Ritz Carlton, but I was sitting in the Ritz Carlton in downtown Atlanta watching the concierge at the front desk and watching this individual. Everybody that didn't know where to go would come up to this individual. He would talk to them. He would tell them like what restaurant to go to. I saw somebody that was having a problem with a refrigerator in their room. They just came down and asked him. He just called and made sure that there was a new refrigerator put in their room. I watched this person who seemed to have institutional knowledge across everything really satisfy all the questions that these individuals had. And I said, how could we adopt that same principle into our organization? So we built a client concierge department that does nothing except sit here to service our clients and make sure that we do it not new. We have an NPS, a net promoter score that we run. We survey clients at the weak points that we saw. The weakest point we saw is when somebody gives you their credit card, they lose all the trust in you, right? So they talk to you, they finally give you the credit card, they no longer trust you, so you better act fast. So client concierge called them. Hey, you just gave us your credit card. Here's what's happening next. Client concierge calls them at 30 days. It's your first 30 days. How are things going? calls them in 90 days. Hey, it's 90 days. How are things going? And by doing that, we're not perfect, but we've been able to fetter out a lot of the inconsistencies in our brand promise
Yeah,
that we don't want to have there.
that's a great idea. You know what? Again, I can honestly say in 25, 30 years, I've never heard that before. And I'm sure there are other firms out there that do something similar, but I've simply never heard that. That's a great idea. And I have a close friend of mine who, when he travels, only stays at Ritz Carlton's for that reason. He had some sort of emergency. He was in New York and he and his wife were going to a Broadway play, needed a dress hemmed for his wife in an hour. Went to the concierge, and the concierge took care of it for him. So he only stays in Ritz's. So, yeah, that's a great idea. So, just out of curiosity, the concierge department, these are administrative staff. So they're not necessarily addressing legal issues. They're literally just checking in on the client.
Yeah, no legal issues whatsoever. So the number one complaint when you talk to people about any law, especially family law, lack of communication. I said, what if you get tired of my communication? It's not legal work, doesn't cost the client a dime. It's just an internal investment. If a legal question comes up, we use Clio, cloud-based stuff. They write it in there and we figured out how to tag the attorney. The attorney gets the question and knows that they're up to call and answer the question for the client.
Good for you. That's great. All right. So, as mentioned already, the firm's been mentioned on the Inc. 5000 list twice, and you hit number 3 on the law firm 500 list in 2025. That's not accidental growth. That's due to intentional strategy for growth. Walk us through a quarter or maybe a year where you made the decision that directly accelerated revenue and or market share. What was it?
So the only reason I missed Inc. 5000 this year is I forgot to apply. I calculated enough what we do it on, and I was like, I forgot to apply. And that just because it would have been 3 years in a row. I joined my wife in October of 2020. We were talking about how to grow because it went from one person to 2 people. The thing that helped us grow the most was my ego. I knew that I knew nothing. The only thing I was confident in when I sat down to try to even think of a file architecture, right? So we're going from one person to 2 person. We're thinking about a way to save files on the internet was, holy crap, I don't know anything. And so I started researching, and on January 1, I hired a business coach. And it was more money than I wanted to spend at the time. It was something that I couldn't really afford. I didn't think that was weird. Like, I didn't think it was weird to say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to go look for answers. It became, I think that was the point at which our growth was able to take off because, we grew, we 4X the next year, then we 5X again, and then, we 5X again. It wasn't that the business coach told us everything, but it was like, hey, I need to hire my first person. If their salary is going to be $75,000, I need $75,000 in the bank. And they're like, no, you don't. You need the first paycheck in the bank. And that's it. And then you need to make sure you have enough work for them to do to earn the second paycheck. That conversation took 10 minutes, but had I not, it would have taken me a year to figure out on my own.
Yep.
So I would say that is the exact point where we started to separate ourselves.
Okay. So I apologize. Maybe I should have known this going in, but in 2020, when you joined your wife, she was a solo. So you were the second attorney at the firm?
Yeah, I was number 2.
Wow. So in years, you've gone from a solo to 33 attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. Even better than I originally imagined. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about profitability. A lot of firms chase growth, but sacrifice profitability in the process. How do you balance aggressive expansion while still maintaining that profitability, staying financially healthy? And where do you think most law firms get that process wrong?
They like profit and loss sheets. We all hear profit and loss sheets, and we think that what's on the profit and loss sheet is real. Even if you're a cash-based accounting instead of accrual-based accounting, your profit and loss sheet, it kind of means nothing. When I was younger, I fell in hard times and I turned to credit cards, ran up credit card debt, screwed up, right? Financially screwed up, had to suffer through paying off the credit cards, switch back to no credit cards, just cash in the bank. And that left a lasting impression that cash is king. And I didn't make up that title. There's plenty of people out there that say cash is king. And so rather than looking at profit and losses, rather than looking at budgets, rather than looking at cash flow analysis, I looked at the amount of money that we had in the bank every single morning and every single afternoon. And now, even now, we have a meeting every single Monday where I look at the exact amount of money that cash is in the bank and all of our accounts, our operating accounts, our trust accounts. I look at how much money we're supposed to spend over the week. And on Friday afternoon, we have a meeting to make sure those two numbers still align. Growth burns cash. Scaling burns cash. You want to grow, it costs. Keeping an eye on every single dollar really is what allowed us to grow, because if we had relied on a profit and loss sheet, you need profit and losses, you need budgets, you need budget variance reports. But had we relied on that, we would have failed.
Okay. Wow. All right. Interesting. Just maybe something I can look at with my business. So yeah. All right. So now let's talk about the firm's culture and how potentially it's a competitive advantage. We mentioned this several times, talk about the numerous awards the firm has received, including best places to work in Virginia. It's not typical for law firms, especially fast-growing law firms, to maintain that corporate culture. Most law firms treat culture like nice to have. You know, if it can be a good place to work, great, but we have other goals. You clearly treat it as a business strategy. So let's talk a little bit about what it means in practice and how culture means perhaps more to you than just simply it being a buzzword.
Culture's tough. I don't want to beat around the bush. You know, when we were first getting started, it was my wife and I, right? Our culture was us. Our business meetings took place on walks in the park. And we went for a walk every single morning, kind of discussed what was going to happen throughout the day, and then got to work. You know, I've got long hair. I don't wear a tie. I do wear a suit because I realized if I wore jeans every day, everybody else would wear jeans. But, you know, bringing the idea of what our culture would be was very intentional because we had to think about it. It was both an advantage and disadvantage to be a partner with your spouse because the culture is already there. The reality is, I mean, you already have a relationship. And so our culture started as being different. We were going to look at the practice of law as being 180 degrees different than what service you receive when you go to a doctor. You go to the doctor, they send you 1,000 reminder emails. They ask you to fill out an information packet. You show up and they treat you like a burden. You go sit in a room and wait for however long. Doctor walks in and asks you all the same information that was on the packet that you filled out.
Yes.
And people not bought into that. They believed it because what I believed. I've had a spinal fusion surgery. I've been through the medical process. It's terrible. No offense to doctors. I know that they're doing the Lord's work. But, you know, that was easy. Then we had to start trying to put management structures in place so we could continue to grow. Mm-hmm. Management structures tend to bend to one idea: experience. We want experience. We need experience. We need that person with 10 years of experience. And we had to fight through some culture problems by hiring the people with 10 years of experience who knew what they were doing in the position, but had no interest in being part of a team.
Right.
To saying, look, experience, of course, if you're going to be a lawyer, I need you to have a law degree. I need you to pass the bar. I need you to know what Lexus is. But I also need you to be open to a new experience and trying to come to a law firm that is culture focused. And I tell everybody, we're a flat circle. The attorneys only have cases because of the marketing team. The marketing team only has money because of the finance team. The finance team only has bills to collect because of the work the attorneys do. It's a giant circle. We can all treat each other with respect. And quarterly culture survey, literally one person said, I get that you want to respect everybody, but don't you think attorneys are actually more important? And it was a negative. It was a negative about things I said, but I was like, that's a win.
Yeah.
I am actually resonating that we're all equal here in making this go forward, but it is never ending. It's day to day. It's in every single meeting that we have. And it's never losing that idea of the attorneys are the ones that build the money. The finance team is the one that collects it. The marketing team is the one that tells people what we do. And the attorneys and the paralegals then do the work.
I like that, a flat circle. Let's talk a little bit about the office distribution and how culture sort of factors into that. How do you build accountability and trust when people aren't in the same room or even or in the same building or even in the same state? What systems do you have in place to keep everyone aligned from a culture perspective?
We try to have a management training program. And I say try. Everything is try. We've never succeeded. And there's a book called The New Gold Standard, Back to the Ritz Carlton. The New Gold Standard is about the Ritz Carlton and how they took the flavor of each and every location they were at to give you the best experience possible. they didn't say this is the way Ritz Carlton is and then repeat in every market. So if you go to the one in Atlanta, there's peach focused stuff everywhere. If you go to the one in Miami, it's very Miami focused. If you go to one in Philadelphia, it's very Liberty Bell focused. And I said, that's what I want. I want to give each office the autonomy to live the area that they're in. Our office in Fort Worth can't operate like our office in Northern Virginia. So giving them that autonomy and saying, be yourself, but this is the back end core values that we're going to live by. Our core values are partner. We are your partner in divorce. Our core values spell out partner. And these are our partner values. And then we just talk to people. We say, hey, are you living up to the partner values? Are you being professional? Are you being accountable, responsible? Are you working with your team? Are you nurturing empathy? All of these things put together, but still being, San Antonio instead of trying to pretend that you're Richmond, Virginia. And that really has helped us keep the core values in place while acknowledging that each area is different and not going to be repeatable across the country.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the work that the firm does. Family law can be emotionally draining, the different types of matters that your attorneys and staff have to deal with, going through divorces, custody, quite often high conflict situations. How do you prevent burnout amongst your staff while still trying to drive performance, strive for that growth? And what support systems do you have in place for your attorneys and staff?
Burnout, if you buy too much into the emotional conflict, is going to happen no matter what. You can't spend your life's work separating families without having it impact you a little bit. We talk about looking at the other side of it. We're not separating families. We're creating opportunities for people to move on. They're in bad situations. Even if it's not bad, they're in a situation they don't want to be in. We're helping them move on. We use our technology to have all the attorneys jump on a Teams meeting weekly for an hour where we kind of talk about a different topic, but it also gives them an opportunity to tell war stories in a very collegial environment. No judgment really, where they be like, oh man, I had a client that did X, Y, and Z. Like, oh, that's terrible. I had that one time, and we're talking about people that are separated by 1,000 miles now coming together and being able to talk about what would naturally cause burnout with somebody else who's also dealing with the same thing creates a unwritten support system. And it was not the purpose of why we created that meeting. We created that meeting just to have a collaborative, like, hey, this is a evidentiary type issue you might come across. This is a discovery issue. And then the war stories started coming and you started seeing people just breathe a sigh of relief when they got to get it out with other people that understood.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a good idea. And it just happened naturally?
It did. When we started asking people for examples, we started just seeing that one person would give an example and we all have our own perception. We're going to allow our emotions to creep in. If I'm behind somebody going 25 miles an hour in a school zone, I'm like, slow down. But if I'm behind somebody going 25 miles an hour in a 50-mile zone, I'm mad. So my perception creeps into that. And, then they hear somebody else also had the same perception. They no longer feel bad about judging somebody one way or the other, even though they did the best they could for the client.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Now let's talk a little bit about hiring, whether it's an attorney or a member of your staff. What's the first thing during the hiring process you listen for that tells you that someone will be successful or thrive at Melone Hatley in your culture versus someone who's just simply looking for a job, looking for a paycheck?
I would like to pretend I'm good at that. I am not. I always give everybody a second chance. But we started looking at the little things people did. Client satisfaction is not based off the big win. Client satisfaction is based off the million little things that we do before we get to court.
Yep.
So if somebody showed up to the meeting on time, if they were dressed appropriately, if they had taken the effort to make sure that their background was appropriate, if they, if you don't have your camera on, you're not getting the job. Because I get technology, I get whatever, but if you don't have a camera on and don't have a great excuse for not having your camera on, it ain't happening. And I'm looking for the people that put that little bit of extra effort in. We also instituted for most of our positions a written interview. The written interview is after you do the interview, if we like you, we send you a written questionnaire for you to fill out. 9 or 10 questions, supposed to be super simple, like what's the last book you read? Things like that. And then we ask a couple trick questions in there like, hey, when you send this back to us, write your name backwards. So did you read? Did you pay attention? And, we explain to people, it's not the bar exam or it's not a test, it's not the SATs. Just be natural. And from that, you can tell a lot about people because you get the people that are like, what's the last book you read? And it's like, I read this treatise on this. And you're like, you nerd. You're just making this up. And then you get the person that's like, I read a Dilbert comic. And I'm like, that person is going to fit in well because they tell the truth. They're not trying to be overly pompous. They're just talking about things that they like. The written interview really was, say, one of the opportunities that we had to get to know people better versus the face-to-face. And, what you tell me about your experience, we're all going to lie, right? We're all going to sit there and say, oh, I've been to court 1,000 times. And you're like, well, you've been a lawyer for 3 years. That'd be like 330 times per year. There's only 260 working days in a year. How? Right?
Math doesn't add up.
No.
Interesting. So does everyone get the written interview questions, attorney, staff, across the board?
They do.
You've said before, and you said it during this conversation, that leadership is about, inspiring people, empowering teams, building a culture that allows their inherent talent to thrive. That sounds good, but what does that actually look like on a Tuesday afternoon when someone, drops the ball somewhere, which inevitably that's going to happen, or maybe a case goes sideways? And how do you balance accountability and with empowerment?
It's a case-by-case basis, right? It's no X plus Y equals Z type situation. It's, has this person performed in the past? When they talk about the mistake they made, are they being accountable? Going back to our core values, were you acting professional, or were you being, when you're dealing with opposing counsel, you can be professional, you can be a jerk. And you're being a jerk, and now opposing counsel won't give you an extension, which hurt your client. No kidding. You were a jerk. Are you accountable for what you did? Are you going to say, look, this is my fault. I dropped the ball. And if you tell me that, I've probably screwed up everything that you can even think to screw up. I'll be like, hey, then we need to do X, Y, and Z. Were you being respectful? We look at all of people's actions within the confines of our core values to try to make those decisions. And sometimes people just aren't. I know when we talk about leadership, we oftentimes add the word coachable in there. Sometimes people aren't coachable because they don't want to be coached. And sometimes people are really going to excel somewhere else. Disney has this management seminar, a leadership institute that they run. And one of the things they always say is sometimes their employees get promoted to park guest, which means they were fired. And I always thought that was humorous because now you get to come back and be a park guest, but you're no longer an employee. And the reality is there are great people that go to the wrong organization that will actually fly at other organizations. We as leaders need to identify that and not continue to try to hold people back when it's not necessary.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. All right. So let's now talk about something I titled the CEO's Toolkit. So you're not just running and managing Melone Hatley. You're also the host of a couple of podcasts, the Business Blueprint podcast, which is all about entrepreneurship and organizational leadership. You're clearly thinking about that role, the CEO's role, at a very high level. So let's drill down a little bit into leadership habits and frameworks that you actually use at the firm day to day. What are the non-negotiables in your operating system as a CEO?
The non-negotiables, like I said, I want to know the numbers Monday and Friday. That's where I start. And then, we have set meetings where if you're on vacation, I let it go. Like for COOs on vacation, we'll miss this one, but just send me an email. Let me know what's going on. And it's taking a very as objective as possible look at what we're doing to say, I either did that right or I did that wrong. I always say that I'm one of the weird people that when something goes wrong, the first person I look at is myself. And that is a hard cross to bear for other leaders. When something goes wrong, I'm like, then what did you do wrong? And I always want people to start with, it comes from the military after action plans, after action meetings, right? When they go out on a mission, they come back, they talk about everything that went right and wrong. And that's sort of the non-negotiable, is that we're going to learn from every single thing that we do. We're going to learn from our mistakes, and we're probably going to learn a little bit less from the things that we do right. But if we don't acknowledge that we make mistakes, we're never going to learn anything, and this isn't the job for you.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And the point that you made at the beginning of that, I completely agree with you. I think it's inherent in most people. They always try to find fault in someone else. It wasn't my fault. So to be able to look in the mirror and say, okay, what went wrong and what did I do wrong? and then start there. It's a good place to start. What is the typical week like for you as a CEO as compared to when you were practicing law? How much time do you spend on strategy versus operations? So looking to the future as compared to operating the business in the moment. And how has that balance shifted as the firm's grown?
I'll answer the second question first. The balance has shifted as the firm grew because I had to become much, much more intentional in making sure I focused on where I thought we could go
Okay.
versus what we're doing right now. Pulling your head up out of the weeds, looking up real quick.
Yeah.
The first 2.5, 3 days of the week, I spend in meetings that are operationally focused. How much money do we have in the bank? Here's what operations did. I meet with our director of marketing to see how that's going, the marketing channels. We utilize scaling up. So we have a scaling up meeting where we talk about, did we meet our KPIs? Tuesday kind of follows the same thing, right? We get in a longer meeting with the operations team and the CFO to talk about how those two things work together. And then Wednesday, kind of tying everything up, but halfway through Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, it's all on thinking about how we can grow. What can we do better? I spend a lot of time going back over books I've read and say, what did I miss? What could I have taken away from this? And then thinking about, here's where we currently stand and doing projections. I love projections, like my favorite thing in the world. You give me an Excel spreadsheet and a bunch of data and ask me what we're going to be doing in 5 years. I'm like, got it. Give me a day. But I spend a lot of time thinking about how to take all the data that we have and compiling it in such a way that every data point we have is an actionable move forward. So that's how I break everything up. And I am becoming more and more hyper-focused on asynchronous information, right? Our ability to pass information to each other when we're maybe not online at the same time, and trying to put a dollar sign next to all the data points we have and figuring out how much more successful we could be if we were to utilize that information.
Share with me a little bit about, you mentioned Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays, more operationally focused, Thursday, Friday, more strategically focused. How do you prevent yourself from being pulled away or getting distracted by operational issues on that Thursday and Friday?
Best I can.
I mean, well, you know what? Actually, maybe even a better question is, are you good at it? I mean,
I'm getting better at it.
Okay.
I personally had to start witnessing the value of the strategy I can make to understand that if I'm going to take 40% of my week and focus on strategy, it better be worth 40% of my time.
Yeah.
A big issue comes up. We had a really big issue come up the other day. I come up in the middle of the day, Thursday. I jumped on a plane. I mean, literally, it happened Thursday, jumped on a plane Thursday night, was somewhere else Friday morning. Not a lot of strategy happening there, a lot more operationally focused stuff happening. But that operation action, by the end of Friday, when I was back on the airplane, was turning back into strategy and what our next steps had to be in order to get to where we were going.
Okay. And I asked that question on behalf of all business owners because that is, perhaps my number one challenge as a business owners, pulling myself away from the operational issues and trying to think strategically about how to not only grow the business, but improve the business. So thank you. We've talked a little bit about this, some cross-industry leadership lessons, and you've applied them to your law firm. What is one leadership principle or framework that you borrowed from outside the legal industry, something that maybe you've adapted that you've learned or read about from another business or maybe just entrepreneurship that's made a measurable difference in terms of how your firm operates?
One of the ideas that we had is I couldn't tell you our top 5 legal competitors in our area. I would have a hard time naming 5 law firms that are around the office I'm sitting in right now. I never wanted to grow a great law firm. I wanted to grow a great organization.
Okay.
And I keep talking about the Ritz Carlton because it always blew me away every time I walked in. And so I stole a lot from them. I'm not going to say even borrowed. I straight up stole it. One of their mottos when they got started was, ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen. And the reason they had that motto was because when the Ritz Carlton was started, people that worked in the service industry were relatively looked down upon, right? You would look down on them. They weren't even supposed to make eye contact with you. The person that started Ritz Carlton wanted his team to know that they were at the same level as these other people and they needed to be treated with respect. And we stole that, right? I love that. We were ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen, because our clients need to be treated with respect just as much as our clients need to respect the people that we have on our team. And a lot of people take a lot of abuse from clients, and they'll be like, well, this client pays well. It doesn't even come into the equation for me. If somebody's abusive and calls and I hear a recording of somebody cussing out a reception, they're gone. It's done. It's not even a question. Reality is they don't even ask me anymore because everybody already knows the answer.
Yeah, good for you. So if a law firm owner is listening to this podcast and their firm's currently 3 to 5 attorneys and they want to grow, they want to exceed those 5 attorneys that they have on staff, they want to grow to perhaps 10 to 15 attorneys, or maybe even aspire to be a firm, as large that has 33 attorneys. What's the one leadership skill or habit you think they need to develop right now that will help them successfully scale to more than 5 attorneys and sort of exceed that ceiling?
Accept failure. It's the biggest thing. I have it too. Attorneys have egos. We do. We're taught since day one of law school that we're here and we have this level of knowledge and we can go save the world through our ability to speak. Get rid of that ego, accept failure. When you want to hire your 6th person, guess what? Your first person is going to quit. You have to say, okay, I'm sorry. Maybe I can try better, but I'm not going to try to keep you. You're going to change, but it's going to be that failure that teaches you more than anything else, because if you play it safe, you'll never fail. If you never fail, you'll never grow. If you don't grow, you'll just keep shuffling through the same 5 number.
Okay, so now we're going to hit 5 rapid fire questions. Charles, what's the biggest misconception that most law firm owners have about scaling a practice?
That 1 equals 1. It doesn't. So sometimes 1 equals 2, sometimes 1 equals 0.5 when you're doing the math.
Okay, I like that. Where do most law firms lose the growth game before they even realize that they're behind?
When the owner won't get out of the courtroom because they're going to forget to focus on their business.
You've been an attorney at a national law firm. You've also litigated at a boutique practice. Now that you're CEO of a multi-state law firm, what's the one skill or mindset you picked up in each of those environments that you still use today?
The first one, I was a small fish in a big pond. The second one, I didn't matter at all because nobody cared. The third one, I have less money than Jeff Bezos has in his pocket, so I'm still not important.
I like that. Okay. What's one red flag that tells you that a firm's leadership or leadership structure isn't ready to scale?
When they tell me they know more and they stop listening.
Okay. And what's the first thing you'd fix if you walked into a 10-attorney family law firm that's just stuck? They're not growing. They're not adding any attorneys. They're not adding staff. They're not growing in terms of revenue. They're just simply stuck.
Management structure. I would look at who's managing those 10 attorneys and probably get rid of that person.
Okay. All right. I like that. You say it like it is. I like that. Charles, this has been incredibly valuable. I've very much enjoyed our conversation. You've shared a real framework for scaling a law firm and scaling it with intention, building systems, culture, all for sustainable growth while maintaining quality and avoiding chaos for the most part. For law firm owners that are looking to make the leap from legal practitioner or make the leap from being in the courtroom all the time to becoming a business leader and scale their firm strategically, where can they find you?
MaloneHatley.com is the best place to find me. Check out my LinkedIn. Last year, I made a video every single day about management practices that I was learning. This year, I'm reading 2 books a month and just kind of talking about how those 2 books apply to our business and what I'm learning every day.
Okay, very good. Charles, thank you. I really appreciate your time. And again, I appreciate your insights. And thank you for tuning in. If today's episode helped you rethink how to lead your law firm's growth and build scalable systems, subscribe to The Legal Edge. We're bringing you proven strategies from leaders and law firm owners who are building successful and fast-growing law firm practices. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next episode.